Hi, it's Bryant here on a Tuesday morning, and I didn't want short story summer to expire before at least recommending my favorite story of all time, which I'll get to in a second. Wanted to give a little lead up to that. It was January of 2011 when I was going to teach a literature and film course at DePaul University in Chicago. And the course was Narratives of Fear. That was my title, on horror and gothic fiction. And then there would be a cinematic tie-in for some of the texts. So that preceding fall of 2010, I was doing a ton of research. And I came across this book, The Modern Weird Tale by S.T. Joshi. If you ever look up S.T. Joshi, he is an independent scholar who has spent the better part of 40 years accumulating a bibliography that is beyond comprehension. His main focus has been H.P. Lovecraft. He's written kind of the Bible biography on Lovecraft, but he's covered so much more. He definitely has an interest in the dark, the fantastic, the horrific, and especially what we call the weird tale. And I found this book. You can't find this anywhere. There's a very memorable chapter on Stephen King that is not too kind to Mr. King. I think he calls Thinner the poorest excuse for a novel he's ever read in his life. He does not like King's work. But he includes a lot of interesting writers in here that at the time I really didn't know too much about. Writers like T.E.D. Klein, Ted Klein, I think that's how you pronounce it. Thomas Ligotti, Thomas Tryon, of course. Robert Bloch, I knew from Psycho. And then he has a section on a writer I'd definitely not heard of at that time, named Robert Aickman. Now, imagine doing research and coming across this exceptionally odd writer who lived from 1914 to 1981. And Joshi says, he says this: Aickman was an exceptionally odd writer, and his literary gifts were of an extremely high order. His prose style, supple, urbane, sophisticated, restrained, yet capable of surprisingly powerful emotive effects, never falters from the beginning to the end of his work. There are few writers who are as purely pleasurable to read, regardless of their subject matter or the success or failure of their actual work, as Robert Aickman. Wow, I'm sold. So maybe it was the summer of 2010, early fall, I started ordering my used books, I remember, off of half.com. And the first one I got in the mail was a doozy with these Edward Gorey illustrations. I mean, isn't that something? Now, Aickman did not call his fiction weird tales. He called them strange stories. He wrote 48 of them. He wrote 2 very little-known novels, and then 2 autobiographies, 2 of them. And I have both of those, and I'll show those in a little bit. But Cold Hand in Mind actually got something of a rebirth in 2016 from Faber, I believe it's Faber and Faber, with this, you know, not my favorite cover, but kind of mass market, with 8 wonderful stories by Aickman, and they're longest short stories. And you can still find this. This is easy to find. You can probably get it new. As a starting point for Robert Aickman, or an ending point. They're that good. And there's a story in there that has stayed with me to this day, and whenever anybody asks me what my favorite story of all time is, I say, without hesitation, The Same Dog. This to me is such a perfect, terrifying, insidious little tale that you will never forget. And I'll go over that in just a second. I wanted to quickly show you my collection of Aickman. So we have the two, Cold Hand and Mind. If you can find this old, I'm guessing that's a version from the 1980s, check it out. And then in 2014, this was really when Aickman was on the map. NYRB released compulsory games, and unfortunately this just isn't the best representation of his work. It's a beautiful edition. There's a wonderful introduction by Victoria Nelson, but I would maybe hold off on this. The stories are certainly top tier, but not stratospherically top tier like Cold Hand and Mind, or the ones in Painted Devils. Again, look at this Edward Gorey artwork on the front. This has one of my top 5 stories in Aickman's pantheon, or maybe by any writer, called The School Friend. That's one I love very, very much. And then this from Tartarus Press. If you go to Tartarus Press's website, they released all of Aickman's works. Okay? They're not cheap editions. They're very, very nice, beautiful pages, easy to read. Looks like Garamond font, which is a good sign that it's a, nice publishing house. And this is absolutely fascinating. Aickman also founded the Inland Waterways Association. So that was kind of his main focus, and then he became a writer later in life. I'm guessing early 30s. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've looked at his biography. But Aickman was probably most well known in the 60s and 70s for writing and assembling the Fontana, book of great ghost stories. He did the first 8 editions. But his work on the Inland Waterways Association is equally admirable in England. And this is absolutely terrific, The Wine Dark Sea. Okay, this has one of my favorite stories called Into the Wood. You'll never forget that one. And then The Trains. Now these are stories that I really don't know how to describe. They are very much Jamesian in the sense that you will read very delectable prose. I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it's certainly sophisticated, as Joshi said. And then suddenly things just kind of weasel their way into your subconscious, and there'll be a random subtle detail that will just, oh my God. Nothing is ever in your face. All the conclusions are not neatly wrapped up. In fact, I can't think of any that are, definitively concluded. I would say his most famous story that is very much worth the hype is called The Hospice. That's something you will never forget. Here is the table of contents for Cold Hand and Mind. S.T. Joshi's, what he thinks is Aickman's greatest story is Meeting Mr. Millar, which is also in Cold Hand and Mind. So again, come back to this. So, a few comments on The Same Dog. It's about a young boy named Hillary, and I don't want to give anything away. He's the youngest of 3 boys, and he's a somewhat lonely boy, and he befriends a young female school friend named Mary Rossiter. And one day, they go out and take a walk into the country, but at the same time, they are badly frightened by something. And at first it's the most routine thing that you will see, in your neighborhood, out in the country. It would never cause you to, do a double take. But in this case, something very, very unusual happens, okay? And then 20 years later, Hillary is remembering this incident that happened in the country. And he's actually going to revisit the spot with a current colleague in the Army. I think he's in the military at the time. And something happens that calls to mind that earlier incident 20 years earlier. And if you think about the title of the story, that's a little bit of a hint. But from beginning to end, this is an absolute instance of perfection in literary suspense, in kind of refraining from any kind of obvious, stupid, shocking detail. Everything is just understated, but also at the same time exquisitely clear. It's all right there. The Same Dog by Robert Aickman, my favorite short story of all time, by my favorite writer of all time. So check it out. Maybe he's not for everyone. He's certainly more palatable than most Henry James, but he works in his own mysterious ways and is no lesser of an artist. Take care.